Hi, Lauren. Thank you very much for accepting this invitation to share some of your expertise. We have here Lauren Berman, and instead of me introducing you, Lauren, why don't you give us a sense about what who you are and what you do?
Thanks, Adam, and thanks for your invitation. I've been a clinical psychologist for 38 years with a postdoc in child, adolescent, and family therapy. And over the last, say, 20 plus years, a little bit more than 20 years of my practice, I shifted from an initial specialization in working with children in therapy to a more of a specialization in working with parents who are divorcing, children of divorce, and also working, becoming very interested in the impact of divorcing parents on their adult children who are adults during the time of their divorce. And this was my own personal experience as well. My parents divorced when I was a junior in college, and it had a huge impact on me, and it really sensitized me to the issues that young adults and older adults face when their parents divorce during their adulthood.
So I'm very excited to dig into this, and I'll say that I never conveyed this to you, but you also gave me that kind of sensitivity, which for years since I've been thinking about, and I guess led to this kind of this interview, if you will, because we were in a role play. This has to be at least 15 years ago, and the collaborative group, I remember in Midtown in that conference room, and I was asked to be in a role play as a college student whose parents were going through a divorce. So you were there as the child specialist, and in role I was there as a child, and my parents there in role going through the divorce, and the attorneys were there. And I still remember sitting in that chair and feeling like irrelevant, interestingly, that like all this legal stuff was going on, maybe about my younger siblings, but being 19, 20, however old I was, legally it seemed that I was irrelevant, and it felt irrelevant to the conversation. And that experience had an impact on me that certainly when I meet with clients in mediation or the collaborative work that I do, I'm very mindful of that, kind of trying to create that sensitivity to the clients, to the parents. So yeah.
That's part of what I'm really passionate about is helping attorneys understand that they're like first responders. For this population, there are very, very few services out there for adult children whose parents are divorcing, and it is a very disturbing and disruptive time, and yet there's often very, very little understanding and very little support for them. And as attorneys and mediators, you're in that position, and also I guess family specialists, when you have this gray divorce couple over 50, to really ask them, tell me about your children, because adult children, we don't need to make a parenting plan. There's not necessarily child support, possibly for the college student up until 22, but they're not really part of that conversation. That's why you felt irrelevant.
Yeah.
And yet, you're in a position as a first responder to really help the parents recognize what a tender time this is for their children, their adult children.
And I hope by sharing this conversation, that would be, that sensitivity would be further enhanced. So just to kind of start off to make sure we're clear in terms of terms and definitions. So we're going to be talking about adult children. So how do you define that? What age and where they're at in life? What does that mean to you?
Well, I'm really looking at these young people who are 18 and up. And there are different impacts at different stages of adulthood. So the 18 to mid 20s, very, young adulthood, when the developmental tasks have to do with individuation and identity formation and exploring career and love relationships. These young adults get derailed because they're trying to separate and forge their own unique identity, but the parents' divorce oftentimes will pull them back into the family dynamic. It will kind of derail them from having that solid foundation to pull away from. Middle adulthood, it's a little different. You have people in their 30s and 40s who have already established their career, their family, they may have children. They are also disrupted in some very significant ways, but they are not kind of in that flux of early adulthood where they're trying to establish themselves. And, that is a difference. I don't know if you know this, but I've been running adult children of divorce support groups through Family Kind since the beginning of the pandemic. We had been scheduled to run a group at the 92nd Street Y, an in-person group, March of 2020. And clearly that didn't happen. And we ended up through Family Kind going virtual. We're now in our 7th cycle of the group. So we've run, we've run about 80 people through these groups, and people from all over the country and also other countries. We've had people from Germany and Canada and Belgium, and I had somebody from Cyprus. I mean, in these groups, and it is fascinating because there are some very, very common themes, no matter how different the stories are. And there's a huge need for support.
So can you share what some of those themes are?
Sure, I can certainly share some of those themes. For example, one of the themes has to do with how roles change, how the adult child's roles change following the parents' divorce, and how that impacts their sense of identity. Oftentimes, there's like a role reversal, and young adult children may experience their parents, sometimes, tremendously distress the parents themselves, not having kind of the bandwidth to understand that their children are also distressed or in need. They can feel responsible for their parents' emotional and practical well-being. I've, worked with people who are figuring out their parents' finances, or taking their, parent to the doctor, or being in the hospital with the parent. I'm just, things that the other parent would have done, and then that these parents separate and they're no longer there. A lot of boundary shifts. The parent suddenly becomes a peer and confides in the adult child. That's one of the largest problems, this, making the child a confidant that then kind of exposes them to way too much information, detailed information about their parents' marriage or intimate lives, or betrayals or affairs or drug use or, mental illness, whatever. And impacts the adult child's relationship with the other parent. Some adult children have taken a very active role in their parents' legal affairs or financial affairs. And some of them try to mediate the divorce, and then new realities can really conflict with the beliefs you've held about your family. You may have to confront a very painful change in your understanding of a parent who's been a sex addict or had an affair, or hurt your other parent in some way. And many of these people have grown up thinking, oh, I have a happy, perfect family. And sometimes these divorces really come out of the blue for
Mhm.
the adult children. And then, some of them feel very exposed and very disoriented and may have trouble with connecting with grandparents or aunts or uncles of, it it has a huge impact on so that's one of the themes. Another theme is beginning to adjust to the parents as new people and also parents who bring new partners into the family dynamic. And, the parents may have been pulling away or struggling or having a lot of conflict prior to the divorce. And sometimes, especially if children have been away at college or have moved out of the home, may not have recognized that these things are moving in that direction. There may be, as I said, like some kind of a major revelation. I mean, I've worked with adult children where there's been a revelation that there's a half sibling somewhere, or, a mother is pregnant or father's girlfriend is pregnant, and it can change their perception of a parent, and they may have to revise their idealized view of their parent and have a more realistic view of them. And typically, this would happen kind of slowly over the course of one's 20s, where you recognize that your parents aren't omnipotent and they're not, they're flawed human beings like all of the rest of us. But sometimes for uh, young adults or adults whose parents are divorcing, it's like a sudden fall from grace. It's a very sudden thing. A divorce can make their children more aware that their parents are sexual beings, and that can be unsettling. High stress, can reveal their parents in a new light. The parent might have always been seen as, a rock and calm, and all of a sudden that parent is weeping or screaming or, you know, falling apart in some way. So it can involve changing roles, and adults may have to face their parent dating or developing new relationships, and very complicated if that relationship began as an affair. And because having any relationship with this new person can feel like a betrayal of the other parent.
Sure.
Competitive feelings may come up, but there may be regarding the new partner or step siblings who come into the picture, and things get really, really complicated. And there's can be a lot of experience of grief, as if that parental divorce is like a death. It's like serious loss of the family you believed you had.
So that's a lot of things to think about. So for the people that are working with you in this group that you mentioned with Family Kind, is it typically something has happened? There's a problem that they're looking for guidance with that brings them to the group?
Um, they may be searching. Usually they're finding us online, and they may be, their parents have just announced a divorce, or sometimes we've had people whose parents divorced 9 years ago, 16 years ago, 5 years ago. We've gotten a mix. Some of them it's like, this is happening right here, right now in the moment, or 2 months ago, and it's very, very raw. And some of them really are still dealing with the with the experience years and years later, which is something I experienced also. I was in my 50s. My parents divorced when I was 19, and I never really had met another person whose parents divorced in their adulthood until I was in my 50s.
Hmm.
And there's something about being able, even in these support groups, they're not therapy groups, but to share that experience and to hear from others that you're not alone. These feelings are normal. Because that is one of the big problems, Adam, is the adult children whose parents divorce feel very confused about their intense feelings. Like somehow, and even a question that you had posed to me, like, the question of, um, let's see here. If kids are older and out of the home, how impactful can that divorce be? And that is exactly what is confusing, because it's hugely impactful. And yet, these young adults, some of them feel like something's wrong with them for being so upset. Children, we expect if, parents are divorcing, they're going to be disrupted. They may, we may see changes in their school performance. They may throw tantrums or cry or whatever. But these adults feel like, what's wrong with me? And because the society at large kind of has this, well, it's not a really big deal. You're out of the house, you're grown up, who cares? But it is a very big deal.
I
Um,
would I would imagine to some extent it kind of like questions their identity, right? That they grew up with a certain kind of family structure, and that's how they identify themselves. And then this kind of the divorce could kind of pull that identity rug from under them, seeing themselves and the family where they fit in this world very differently.
exactly. And it questions their own perception, the validity of their own perceptions. Like, how did I miss that? Was
Right.
that real? Was it all a sham? They kind of go back and look at their family and their parents' marriages, like, what did I miss? Especially those where some pe- people's marriages have been highly conflicted all along, and those kids are not necessarily adult children are not necessarily surprised. In fact, in some cases, they're relieved. But where it's been like a low conflict, quiet, relatively peaceful marriage, and it's been kind of kept away from them, that whatever, you know, inadequacy or unhappiness either of the parents have felt, then it's like comes out of the blue, and it really is disruptive.
And how might that impact the adult children's own relationship, own romantic relationship with significant others?
Yet they begin to question, like, if my parents could not sustain a relationship, what does that mean? What does that mean for my relationships? What's real? Um, eh, do they, trust that they can have that they can have relationships that are going to be healthy relationships? They're afraid they're going to repeat their parents' mistake, or they worry that it's inevitable that their relationship will break up, or that their partner will be unfaithful. Can they trust? Are you going to repeat the dynamics with your own partner? It makes people feel less secure in their relationships, and some may end solid relationships, um, or because maybe they avoid what they think is going to be an inevitable breakup. And some others may rush to marriage or commitment to try and find a sense of security, and others may stay single because they don't think marriage will ever work. And when they focus their energy, if they're pulled back into the family dynamic, they may have less time and emotional energy to invest in dating or creating their own relationships. And sometimes their romantic partner or their spouse isn't able to understand the extent of their distress, and that puts a strain, can cause tension and distance in their relationship. So it really does have significant impact. I work with actually many of the young people who've been, and not when I say young, I'm saying in their early 20s, who've been in our ACOD groups. They're not dating. They're afraid, or their relationships are not working, and that's a very big concern that's always raised with us.
So what sensitivity should divorcing parents have for their adult children, as opposed to dealing with very younger children?
Well, I think they should really look to create boundaries with their adult children and not use their adult children as, um, you know, confidants to validate their feelings and get them all entwined in the dirty details of their, you know, their unhappiness with the other parent or the betrayal or what happened. They really should try to use their own support network for that, whether it's a therapist or a clergy person or a friend or a family member. But to be mindful that that is a huge burden on their children, even if the children present themselves as open and willing and feel very grown up because they're being drawn in, but it's really not healthy. So that's one thing. Another thing is if the parents themselves can, you know, work together to make it clear what their expectations are for their young adults, um, whether it's how to celebrate a holiday or, in the planning of a wedding or a graduation or a family event or um, when the young person comes home from college, not to leave it to the, young adult to figure it out, but to really say, we've figured this out. It would be, this year mom's gonna have Thanksgiving or, and next year dad will, or, not to make the child be the one that has to navigate it all and feel totally disloyal or, guilty about that. Not,
Which is interesting, Laura, because I often sitting down at the table with couples where there are older children, there is a tendency, they're old, just last week, a father of a teenager said, I said, when do you want, it was a late teenager, when do you want to come over? How about this night? And the child said no. And just not wanting to push back, just respecting her autonomy, he just kind of dropped it, even though both parents wanted a very different result. And I see that there's kind of this respect and not wanting to push the older children to do anything, but I think that might send off the wrong messages to the older children.
I think it can be really reassuring for an older child. Let's say if the parents themselves help make the plan, and just kind of guide them somewhat. And but sometimes, for either parent, it almost feels like a victory if the child is not wanting to be with the other parent, or there's like some satisfaction if there's really hurt and mistrust or betrayal. And the thing that's important to remember is that your adult children's relationship with the other parent is their unique relationship, not yours. They're not in it to avenge your hurt. You know,
So I could see you're saying like there's some kind of vindication that one parent, let's say a mother might say, yeah, you see, it's not just me, it's all your relationships, even your adult children, are not really interested in spending time with you, and that makes them feel better about their choices. But you're saying be wary of that way of thinking.
it, recognize that your adult children are also still your children, even though they're adults, and they're still works in progress, for decades, and they need the support of a parent. Sometimes the parents, especially these parents who are we would call the gray divorce, a cohort over 50, some of them just become so caught up in almost like adolescence, another adolescence, and just kind of drop their parental mindset in a way.
So So how do you see that the relationship, I don't know if there's a typical, but how might the relationship between the adult children and the parents change in light of the parents' divorce?
Well, on the positive side, it can allow young adults or adult children to develop unique relationships with each of their parents, not as like this kind of mush of mom and dad, but to really learn who each of their parents are as individuals and to develop, kind of differentiated relationships with each of them, to get to know them better, to have deeper connections. Um, and there are also, some real downsides there. I see many people who come in and they've completely lost connection with a parent because they've been so hurt, or their mother's been so hurt, so they can't talk to their father because it'll be disloyal to their mother. So we really want to protect kind of against those uh, cutting off relationships as a solution.
So, I think we've focused on kind of the problems and the challenges with, divorcing parents of adult children. Before we kind of shift to more towards, things for the parents to keep in mind and, what might help. Anything else you want to outline in terms of, some of the challenges, or do you think we covered it?
Well, we're not going to cover it all, but I think we've touched upon a lot of lot of the challenges. I'm just trying to think if there's anything. Well, just the idea that the law, a parental divorce is like a death. It can be experienced as a death, like the death of the family as they knew it, and it is perfectly normal to grieve that, and it's psychologically important and healthy to go through a grieving process. And to the extent that a parent can recognize that that is what their adult child is going through too. When a parent is in the midst of their own divorce, they just may not have the emotional wherewithal and bandwidth to recognize the pain of the child.
So if this, with this sensitivity, and hopefully watch this video, and their parents are now more sensitized to that, what would you recommend that they do to help their adult children go through this, and to show them the sensitivity and support their adult children?
Well, certainly to normalize, validate their feelings, to respect their boundaries, to, as I said before, to help choreograph events, or, so that the adult children aren't like caught in the middle and trying to, figure out where to go, or what to do. To prioritize the needs of the children, and also, this sometimes affects grandchildren. There are many families that I've met where the grandchildren, there's a parenting plan for the grandchildren because grandma and grandpa can't be in the same room at the same time. So we get to this situations where they're, child's second birthday party, and either grandma or grandpa can't come because they can't stay out of the conflict. So for the parents to make their best efforts to get along, at least, to be neutral and civil, polite, respectful, so that their children and grandchildren can, from time to time and on important events, have an experience, where there is a sense of family, despite the divorce.
In terms of going back to what I experienced in the role play, and I started to hear, and I remember this, that you experienced in your life with your parents, the relevancy concern, or the lack of relevancy. What would you recommend to parents to help counter that experience that the young adult children, might have, feeling that all this divorce is going on, the focus is on the younger kids, and I'm just irrelevant. What would you
Right.
tell the divorcing parents to help in that regard?
Well, I would tell the divorcing parents to, to process it themselves and sit down with their adult children and, be open to hear what the adult children have to say, what their experiences are, to offer them support, to talk about the possibility of support groups or therapy if necessary. I just to this whole idea of this confusion, the emotional confusion, and to be aware of that,
Mhm.
that may come up, to recognize that this is a big deal. You know,
So what kind of messages should the parents be conveying to their kids that will help minimize any of these kind of emotional disruptions or challenges?
just somehow we're going through this divorce. We recognize that we're always going to be a family, you know, on some level until you predecease us or we predecease you. We've got to figure out a way to allow us to go forward, especially for these really important life cycle events that can come up. We're here for you. This is how, sometimes I've heard from adult children, they get caught up in the, financial struggles between parents. The adult child needs something, and, they go to one parent and your mother took all my money, go ask her. Or, not to do that, to make some even agreements in advance. We're going to set aside this fund for the needs of our young adult child or our adult children, for their college, their graduate school, their weddings, or whatever, not to kind of leave them in that position of having to, you know, try to negotiate with people who are fighting with each other. Again, to support them, normalize their feelings, support their, they need to go to a therapist or a support group, or to just recognize that it's also a crisis for the child, not only for themselves.
Mhm. And you mentioned grandparents. I'm curious, what kind of guidelines or best practices you would recommend when dealing with, for lack of better words, co-grandparenting after a divorce.
Well, again, I mean, if the parents can recognize that, they are the best version of themselves when it comes to being with their grandchildren, um, and keep the conflict away from their their adult children's families, keep it away from their grandchildren. It often does not happen that way.
Mhm. Um, Okay, I think this is very helpful, and for those that are listening, they might be wondering, well, where can we go beyond that? What kind of resources might be available to help either the divorcing parents to be more mindful about this and help with them with regard to these concerns, or resources for their adult children? What would you recommend?
Well, as I mentioned, this Family Kind's program of support groups is probably, we're hearing basically we're the only game in town, and I'm talking about internationally, nationally. It's just not that much that exists, but certainly there is some literature. There are some books out there. But it's it's an area that for the population that there has been very little research done. I'd love to see somebody do, doctoral dissertation or do some research. A very high proportion of parental divorce happens when either the first or the last child goes to college. Parents who've stayed together to give their children a sense of family, but the marriage has been very broken for years, and they're just kind of hanging on until the last child goes to college. Or, I think there is likely a correlation with high suicide rates on college campuses, depression, college campuses. I don't know where I was going with this, but I mean, I don't know when I'm going to have the time to devote to this, but I would like to take the template for this 6-week support group and train people in college counseling centers to be able to do that same group, because I think even that touch point is really preventative, helpful.
Great. Do you want to make a plug for your husband's book or for your joint book for as another resource or two to help parents?
Sure. Well, the Adult Children of Divorce book that Jeff Zimmerman, my husband, and Liza Thayer wrote, maybe, I don't know, 15, no more than that, 20 years ago, is a resource. But I believe that book also looks at children whose parents divorced and now they're adults. And the population I'm talking about is a very separate, different population. The book that we wrote, Loving Your Children More Than You Hate Each Other, was pretty much aimed at high conflict parents where the conflict continues during and after the divorce, and those parents who have young children. It's not specific, but it's always, I think, a very good resource to be able to, for any one individual, even if the other parent doesn't do their best to reduce the conflict, but any one parent to read that to really understand what they can do to reduce conflict with their children's other parent.
It sounds important. I was thinking that I should probably buy a bunch and give that as gifts to these families I'm working with, some of which are really challenged by that high conflict. Yeah.
Many of our attorney colleagues have, bought these by the dozen and hand them out to their high conflict clients.
Yeah. So to finish off, I don't know if you have any other points that you want to, share. But if you could just share for those who are listening who might want to follow up with you directly, how they might do that. And also if you could give a final message to 3 audiences, like a 1-sentence kind of message to the parents who go through divorce, to maybe they'll have their adult children listening to this video, so to the children, and then finally to people like me, attorneys, mediators, what would be the message to us?
Okay, so contact information first. My email is laurenbehrman@gmail.com, laurenbehrman@gmail.com. I also have a website, laurenbehrmanphd.com. My office phone is 212-799-7921. happy to connect with anyone. I'm quite passionate about this topic.
Sure.
My message to professionals is see yourselves as first responders. Recognize when you are sitting across from a gray divorced couple comes into your office, ask them about how their children are. Direct them to some resources. Maybe, yes, tell them to watch this little video. Give these parents an opening to talk about, look, your adult children or your grandchildren, we're not going to make a parenting plan. We're not talking about child support, but you need to talk about how this impacts them and how to support them. I'm sorry, it was more than a sentence. For the children, I will say your feelings are normal. It is fine to grieve. It is normal and healthy to grieve, and you need to, really participate in self-care and creating boundaries. And don't let yourself get kind of caught up in the dynamic of your parents' divorce. It's, you need to really allow yourself the space to work through what the impact on yourself and move forward in your own life. And to parent, I would say, think about your children, think about your grandchildren, think about how to continue the continuity of a sense of family, even though you're no longer married.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much. Clearly, you're so passionate about this, and we all in the community appreciate taking that passion and helping those who go through it to help them get through it the best way possible. So, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, and thanks for letting me get this message out. Good to see you, Ed.